Yeah, of course. In the Hulk, that has happened from time to time. Banner during John Byrne's run, Banner and Hulk were separated, and other times that's happened. So he could have died during those times, but uh, but he just there's that green door that just lets him back out into the world anytime he would die, which and the fact that kind of all of the Gamma characters have access to that, it makes a really interesting story to tell, and I'm really interested to see where they're going with Immortal She-Hulk.
Let's talk nerdy things, yeah, like comic books and superheroes, with some nerdy picks, yeah, writers, cartoonists, and so much more. Whoa, yeah, so stick around and have some fun with the lovely and adorable Eva Webb. Eva Webb.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Titular Characters. I am your adorable host, Eva Webb. This is issue 6, and we're going to talk about superhero costumes and comics in general with Kurt Onstad, the amazing host of the Welcome to Geektown Podcast. Hi, Kurt. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well, thank you. Nice to hear amazing added to my description.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love your podcast. So informative and so interesting, and I love hearing you talk about some of this stuff. And when I was looking for people to talk about superhero costumes and you volunteered, I got super excited. I really did.
Oh, well, I love talking anything superheroes. Costumes. It's not my main focus. It's not I wouldn't call it my area of expertise, but I've read up on it somewhat, and always, like I said, love talking superheroes with anyone, and especially someone who seems to be as knowledgeable as you are from what I've seen on Twitter and from listening to your first episode of Titular Characters.
Oh my goodness, thank you. I really appreciate that. Uh, okay, so where do you start with superhero costumes? Do you start in the 1930s, or do they go back earlier?
I think, well, I mean, obviously, Superman is going to be one of the big go-tos as a beginning, but I think you also should look back at some of the pulp heroes and characters, like Zorro, was pre-Superman, and the Scarlet Pimpernel has a very, even though he wasn't drawn originally, was from a prose book, he still has a very distinctive look about him when you see all of the various portrayals of him over the years. And so I think with superhero costumes, you have to remember those progenitors that they came from. Like Superman was very much inspired by the strongman costume from the circus. And then, like I said, combine that with the pulp heroes of the earlier 30s and even before that, and that's kind of where you get those first real, what we would now look at and say, the beginnings of the superhero costume.
Interesting. So, do you feel like superheroes, in order to be superheroes, have to have a costume? I have a friend who's been drawing comics for like 50 years, and I asked him that question once, and what he said I thought was funny was something along the lines of, well, I guess so. But would Donald Duck still be a duck without the beak?
Well, would Donald Duck still be the Donald Duck if he wore pants? That I think that's a more appropriate question because, you know, that's, I mean, his costume is the sailor shirt and the cap and the no pants, right?
Well, it can't be
You know,
into Howard the Duck, you know.
well, yeah. If you put pants on Donald, you get Howard. Um, but um, boy, was there a lawsuit about that one. Uh,
Yeah,
um, but I don't think you have to have a costume to be a superhero. It certainly helps make you more easily identifiable. But take a character like Jessica Jones, even in the Marvel universe. She's got kind of a look about her with, jeans and a leather jacket, but you wouldn't call it a costume per se. But she's still a superhero. She still helps people with her powers. That's I think that's more important to defining a superhero than a specific costume. But like I said, getting a costume, makes it easier for you to recognize which superhero is which, especially in something like the Marvel universe. If you lined up all the characters in street clothes, it'd be much harder to identify which one is Spider-Man and which one is, Nova, just by looking at them side by side, as opposed to if they're in their costumes, you can easily say, oh, yeah, Spider-Man, red and blue with webs, Nova, yellow and blue with stars.
why do you figure the villains need costumes?
Well, again, I think the biggest thing for costumes in a comic book is for that easy character recognition. Um, if you have two guys who have, you know, uh, fire powers, like say Pyro and I'm blanking on another fire villain, but Firebrand, let's say, and they both can control fire but not create it themselves. You want to be able to look at them really quickly and say, "Oh, I know who that is." And then be able to, associate that in your mind with, okay, their backstory is this, and so I know basically what I'm getting into. So character recognition is a big part of it, and then comics are a visual medium. Pictures are more than, most people would say the pictures are more than half the reason that you're there to read a comic book. And so the artists want something visually striking to draw. If it was just people in jeans and a t-shirt fighting each other, that could get really dull really quickly, and again, you wouldn't recognize who was fighting each other without constant reinforcement.
So it's about recognition, and it's about being able to spot, characters and the heroes and the villains and all that. Do you think there's a big difference, at least historically, between the way heroes and villains are drawn, or do you think they're about the same?
Well, the big difference between heroes and villains for a very long time at least was their coloring. The colors on their costumes. The heroes had the primary colors of blue, red, and yellow. And when I say primary colors, I mean for the additive colors, not the light spectrum, which would be cyan, yellow, and magenta. So, they have, and, you look at characters from the 30s up to probably the 70s or 80s even, and heroes are almost always in some combination of blue, yellow, red, and then white and black, whereas the villains were given the secondary colors, green, orange, and purple. I was looking at some history of coloring in comic books, the actual technology behind it, and those six colors, red, yellow, blue, purple, green, and orange, were the ones that you could get by using solid sheets for the color art. You didn't have the dots or the lines that you had. They were called Ben Day was one of the first coloring technologies with the little dots that you would use. If you wanted either 75% filled or 50% filled or 25% filled of a specific color. That you did that by making the dots more dense or less dense. So those colors were used because they were the most consistently shown. They're from page to page, they were the most easy to stay consistent. And then it's just kind of basic color theory that the primary colors we associate with mostly kind of bright, happy things, whereas the secondary colors are a little more off-putting to us usually.
Is that why you don't see very many superheroes from that era with pink costumes? You do see a few later. I mean, towards the end of the analog printing process.
Yeah,
X-Men,
and I mean,
Dazzler, Boom Boom, a couple of others.
yeah, once you get into the 80s, the coloring technology was a little, had improved quite a bit. Not quite into the computer coloring era of the early 90s, but still, it was a more consistent process, and more, you didn't have as much of those. You'll see a lot in the old comics where the color is slightly off register from the line drawing. So just technology had improved, and so they had a larger palette to choose from and could be more consistent with those colors. It's the reason why Hulk in his first appearance was gray, but in every issue after that, he was green, because in that first issue, Stan Lee wanted him to be gray, but if you can find a Hulk #1 in its original printing, you'll see that from page to page, his coloring is completely inconsistent. It's a very light gray sometimes and a very dark gray other times, and it had nothing to do with whether he was in light or in shadow. That's just the coloring was just inconsistent. And so Stan said, well, we can't do that for every issue, so let's make them green because we know green works. And then later in the 80s, once coloring had improved, they could bring back the Gray Hulk and have him show up as a regular character again.
Yeah, the Fixer.
Yeah. Peter David's run on Hulk is one of my favorite issues, one of my favorite runs of all time.
It was great. It was absolutely great. Peter David gave us so much with the Hulk. Are you reading any of the Immortal folk right now?
Oh, the Immortal Hulk? Yeah. it's doing some good stuff, and it really seems to be drawing on basically almost all of Hulk's history, which I really like when writers can take bits and pieces from an entire character's run and make kind of new combinations and fit things together to tell a new story while still honoring and acknowledging that past.
I feel like it was cool because in my head, as I've been reading the Hulk on and off for years, it's never, up until recently, it has not been one of my favorite comics. It always really struck me as, the Hulk is not invulnerable. You can hurt him. So I always wondered how, like, you could drop a skyscraper on his head, which has happened a dozen times. You could fling him in space, you know, crash
Yeah,
on a distant planet a billion miles away, in a fireball, and he never ever dies. And I'm really kind of excited that they've finally faced that question, and their answer is, well, he can't die. I mean, well, he can, but he
yeah,
can't.
he does, but he immediately comes back next time he's the Hulk.
Well, you could. So, like, they in the first issue or in the first arc of Immortal Hulk, what they did was they made up this thing where you can kill the Hulk if you separate him from Banner and throw him into an alternate universe, but you couldn't kill him when he's, I guess under default settings, if that makes
Mm,
sense.
yeah, of course, in the Hulk, that has happened from time to time. Banner during John Byrne's run, Banner and Hulk were separated, and other times that's happened. So he could have died during those times, but uh, but he just there's that green door that just lets him back out into the world anytime he would die, which and the fact that kind of all of the gamma characters have access to that, it makes a really interesting story to tell, and I'm really interested to see where they're going with Immortal She-Hulk. I think was it just a one shot, or is that going to be ongoing? They did something with her recently.
I haven't read it yet, but it does look exciting. It's on my list of things to pull down from Comixology. Um, my problem right now, and this is a dumb problem, I'll be perfectly honest, is that I have such a huge reading list. You know, I had 100 books on my list of things to read, and I'm slowly but surely making it through all of them. And then a couple of weeks ago, I had David Avalon come on my podcast, and he's like, "Well, you have to read all these great books I wrote now." And I'm like, "Oh wow, yeah." So I got to look, and I'm like, "Oh wow, these look pretty good. This Betty Page Unbound thing looks like exactly the kind of thing I want to read." So throw it on the pile, and now I have this just ridiculous pile. What I need to do, I think, is take a month off of life and lock myself in a room and just read all these comics that I want to get to. So if I sound like I'm behind, that's why.
It's understandable. I mean, uh, I don't have a wife or a child or anything like that. So, when I get home, as long as Londo doesn't get too much in my face, my cat, then I can sit and read for as long as I want and don't have any distractions really, other than social media or other stuff like that that's distracting to everyone these days. Uh, so it's when you actually have family and a life, it's a lot harder to get all that reading done that you want to.
Oh God, yeah, it really is.
But I bet you wouldn't trade your wife and your daughter for an extra hour of reading time a day.
Oh, they are wonderful. My daughter is the light of my life, and I'm just crazy about her.
That's great.
So just to go back to the Hulk thing for a second, why do you think it is that it's only now that we're discovering the Green Door and all that entails?
Well, I mean, there's the in-universe reason and the out-of-universe reason. The out-of-universe reason, the real explanation is that there wasn't a writer who wanted to tell that story until now. But the impetus in universe was that Banner had never really died until the Civil War II, with the Inhuman that could predict the future, and that's where Hawkeye used that special arrow and shot Bruce Banner and killed him before he could Hulk out. And so that was really the first time that Banner had died. And so, his consciousness being down there with the Green Door, maybe you could say that's kind of what opened up his realization to that. And so, kind of changed the status quo going forward.
Who's your favorite villain, just in general?
My favorite villain? Favorite hero's easy. Favorite villain.
Okay, favorite hero.
Well, favorite hero is Speedball.
Oh yeah.
From the New Warriors. He's kind of what really got me into comics in the first place. And so I feel a real strong connection to him. And, I just love his attitude towards life. And this is, my feelings for him came about very much pre-Civil War and pre-Penance. So that was a frustrating time for me. But his very, kind of happy-go-lucky attitude towards life, but at the same time, when things were needed to be serious, he knew, he could read the room and he could recognize, now's not the time for my jokes. Right now, Elvin Rage needs me. And so, I'm just going to be here for him. And so he's a great friend to everybody else on the team. And he's the heart of the New Warriors. He's been in, except for the volume 4, which was the unpowered X-Men version of the New Warriors. He has been in every iteration besides that. And if he learned his powers and was able to control them completely, he would be one of the most powerful characters in the Marvel Universe, because he can control kinetic energy. And that means everything. He can control basically any movement, and kinetic energy is also temperature. The average kinetic energy of your molecules is how hot or how cold you are. So he could control temperature as well. He could be telekinetic. He could be, he could weigh you down like gravity. He could just do so much with his powers if he actually put his mind to it. But he doesn't, and he just bounces around and is still just so much fun.
I have always felt like Speedball is a severely underappreciated character in the Marvel Universe. I feel like even Cloak and Dagger, who are kind of, I guess you could say they're C or D-list characters, I think even they get more attention than he does.
Well, they
Generally.
got their own TV show, so that's definitely a step up.
Are you reading a lot of the new stuff that's coming out, like the Fantastic Four and what else? The Three Jokers and stuff like that. What do you think of Three Jokers so far?
I haven't read the most recent issue that's come out yet. It's on my pile. Uh, but I haven't quite gotten to it yet because uh, on weeks that I release the podcast, I have a little less time for reading. And I believe it just came out Wednesday or Tuesday because DC's release schedule is different now. But anyways, so I read those first two issues, and it's interesting. Um, I I'll be curious to see what they finally say about how these three different iterations came about. I have a theory or two, so it'll be interesting to see if I'm at all right. I think the art is absolutely gorgeous. It looks like it looks a lot like it reminds me a lot of Brian Boland's art, and I'm sure that was not an accident that they chose an artist who could draw that in a similar style. Uh, but I I don't know if it's going to live on like other other Batman stories or other Joker stories as something that's uh, referenced as a vital part of his history. I I I don't know how much it's weird that it ended up coming out at the same time as the Joker War was going on in the main Batman title. Um, I I'd be curious to know if they intended that to be after or before, or if they are just saying Three Jokers is in its own universe. Don't worry about continuity or how they're dealing with that.
I was curious about that too, because it really. I haven't gotten to number 3 yet. It's actually the very next thing I'm reading. Um, but number 2 was kind of Elseworldsy, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it did have kind of that feel to it of, we're gonna tell a story and don't worry about how much it ties into the rest of the books. And, Killing Joke was not intended to be in continuity either, until other other writers took it up and said, "Oh well, I guess Barbara's paralyzed now," and so John Ostrander took her and turned her into Oracle, and what they ended up doing with her worked out great for getting a disabled character into the comics as a strong female character who just happened to be paralyzed, um, and showing her intelligence as well as her fighting prowess. So that ended up for the best, I think. But at the time, it could have easily just been one another woman in a fridge, basically.
Yeah, that's a huge problem, especially at DC. Ooh,
Well, I think Marvel did it first, though. I think probably Gwen Stacy would be the first real character that you could look at in mainstream comics and say, she was fridged, basically.
okay, but on the other hand, Gwen Stacy was sort of what everybody liked about Gwen Stacy was that she was sort of a human fleshed out character. When that happened with Kyle Rayner and the villain, just I don't even remember which villain at this point. Um,
Major Force.
Oh God, yeah, the 90s.
I was reading that when it came out.
That was
Well,
Ron
yeah,
Mars.
I mean that's where the name comes from of women in refrigerators or being fridged. That is the trope namer is Kyle Rayner's girlfriend who, had only Kyle Rayner was only like 5 or 6 issues old at that point, and his girlfriend was one issue fewer old. So really neither of them had a lot of character development at that point. But to kill her off in that over the top manner and and not never flesh her out and never make her into a real person and just make her the guilt for Kyle Rayner, and so just to turn it into his motivation, turn her into his motivation rather than being a real person in her own right is where that's the true fridging is when you create a character just to kill her off and to give the male character something to feel.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I guess you could say similar things for Gwen Stacy, though, so you're probably right. Then Gwen Stacy comes back as a clone. And that one's actually one that's still playing out, I think. She's dead.
Yeah. Well, she's dead, she's a clone, she's dead again, she's a clone again, she's dead again, she's an alternate universe version of herself. Uh, she's been put through the ringer. Uh, I have uh most of the early Spider-Man books in the Marvel Masterworks format. So, I've read those over and over and over a few times, and she actually did get character development, unlike the other characters that we're talking about, who were quote unquote fridged. So you're right that she's more of a real person rather than just a motivation for Peter. But in more recent stories, it feels like she's kind of been uh, given sainthood, and so we don't really ever, when they talk about her, she's just the perfect woman rather than the real person that she was, which is kind of where, which is probably why readers today would kind of put her in that same fridged category, because not everyone has read all of her early appearances and the long ongoing story of her and Peter's relationship.
Have you read Spider-Gwen at all?
I've read some of it. Um, when it just took place in her universe, it really didn't draw me in that much. I wasn't really interested in learning a whole new history and and just seeing different versions of all the same characters again. Having Matt Murdock be evil instead of being Daredevil, and stuff like that. It just, and no offense to whoever the artist was, but it really didn't strike my fancy personally. So I didn't read most of that, but with her kind of going back and forth between her universe and the main 616, shall we say, that once that started happening, I started reading more regularly, and so I've read the more recent stuff.
I am totally in love with Spider-Gwen. I mean, I have read that story from the beginning. I read it to my daughter, and it is a ton of fun. I like the way that it's sort of like the 616 Marvel Universe if you squint at it, but it's just different enough to be new and interesting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that really sort of pushed my buttons as a comics reader.
Oh, that's good. And, to each their own. I don't think anything was actually bad about it. It just wasn't for my own reasons, didn't really capture my interest. But if it's if it's something you and your daughter enjoy, especially something you can enjoy together, that's great.
It's neat the way they put that together and the way it thinks and the way it works. Is there another book that just really strikes you as novel, interesting?
Well, I mean, there's some of the obvious answer. Do you want something current or just all time?
Doesn't matter. It could be current too. Whatever you're
Okay.
into.
Well, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I'm in my office, uh, and that's where my trade paperbacks all are. And I've got the Absolute Sandman hardcovers, the giant oversized ones, and that's I mean, how much has already been said about that book that I probably can't add anything new, but that's so amazing, such beautiful storytelling, and just a real modern day fairy tale, uh, in both the good and bad of it. It's it's not like a Disney fairy tale, but it's like one of the Grimm fairy tales, and just so unique and so original. And then I also love, along the same kind of lines. I loved Preacher when it came out. But then I also have books like Box Office Poison, and one book that I will always push on people, especially if they're around my age. It's called The Copybook Tales, and it is by Jay Torres and Tim Levins, and it goes back and forth between the 80s and, well, what at the time was today, the late 90s when it came out, and it follows the same character, and showing how things in the 80s affected his life today, or kind of tell parallel stories. And the adult version of Jamie, who is a very, not quite Mary Sue, but he's basically Jay Torres, just slightly fictionalized. So he's a struggling comic book creator, and his struggles of trying to break into the industry, but then flashing back to these stories of him as a young teenager or maybe a preteen, and being a young comic book nerd, and shy with the girls, and all that sort of stuff. And it's just a such a well told, well crafted uh, story. I hope it's still in print. Oni Press put out the version that I have. I don't know if it's still around, but if you can find it, I recommend it to everyone who enjoys kind of real life stories, rather than wanting something more fictional.
One that I read recently that I just really loved was Wrong Earth, and that one's by I think that one's by Tom Thayer and Jamal Igle. Yes.
I missed the title. Can you say that again?
Sorry, Wrong Earth. It's by
Oh yes, yes.
J-
I have that trade as well. Yeah, yeah. That's a fun kind of deconstruction story. Kind of looking at the tropes of the modern storytelling versus the more Silver Age version of the same character.
I thought it was cool because it felt like I think deconstructions are always fun, you know. But I feel like I like them better when the world they come from, like when they build a world that feels like it's got 50 or 80 years of history behind it, and
Mm-hmm.
out of their way to do that with this one. You know, you've got like these between the comics, you've got like these side mini comics where they feel like they're from different eras. You know, you've got
Yeah.
one. Yeah, I don't remember the name of the sidekick. It doesn't matter. Uh, anyway, it was like Firefly or something like that, and you've got him in the museum chasing ghosts, and it was a really really convincing sort of golden age pastiche. Everything about it just felt authentic. You know, even down to the paper grinning and the way they put it together. And you go forward and you go through like the 70s and then the 90s and then as you read the story, the thing that I thought was really interesting, and this is a sort of a nod to the writing in it. Um, you think these two characters between the Silver Age and the Golden and the current modern age of comics are so fundamentally different. You know, you can sort of tell that they're the same character, but you can tell that one of them's had a gritty overhaul uh,
Mm-hmm.
through it, and you get further into the story, you sort of see that they're not as different as you think they are.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was I had read a few reviews of it, and then I was down in Southern California visiting a friend of mine who happens to own a comic book store, and saw a copy of it there, and said, I've heard good things about this. I'm gonna buy this here, and yeah, I took it home and read it, and was not disappointed. It is, yeah, it's a great deconstruction, like we said. And really gets into that, and has some great character development between the two versions. Along those same lines, like you said, of stories where you feel like there's 50 or more years of history there. Astro City is always a favorite. That goes straight to the top of the reading pile as soon as a new issue comes out.
And that's written by Kurt Busiek, right?
Yes, yes, it is. Kurt Busiek. Most of the art is by Brent Anderson with covers by Alex Ross, and you can tell from basically issue one that how much work they put into making Astro City feel like a real place that has been lived in for hundreds of years, and has that deep history, and going back to kind of the pulp era, uh, up to a modern age, and even has now shown some of the future of that world. And there's only there's got to be less than 100 issues, I think, in total, but it feels as rich and as deep as the Marvel or the DC universe, just you, because Kurt, Alex, and Brent put so much time and effort into creating that world.
I like how when you're reading Astro City. I just started reading the trade paperback because I've been watching these YouTube videos where what is the name? Hang on, I can look up the Casually Comics. That's the one.
I had a feeling you were gonna mention her. She's that I love that channel. Yeah.
I love Sasha so much. I do. She is so cute and so funny. Uh, so yeah, she got me to read Astro City, and I picked it up. And the thing that really struck me, the thing that I'm about halfway through the first trade paperback, and
So life in the big city.
that's the one.
Okay.
And strikes me about it is that it's not like all Superman or all Doctor Strange or all, what you think that you get like, a linear chronological story from it, but you don't. You have to put the pieces together in your head. Sort of like if somebody just dropped a pile of comics on you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I like that
The
a lot.
that the second trade you are gonna absolutely love. It focuses primarily on one character, but it is a masterwork. The Confession, I believe, is the name of that trade, and it's a high point of the series. I mean, the whole series is good, but that's the one that I will go back to the most and just reread and find all the little details along the way, that because it's a little bit of a mystery, and you're gonna love it when you get there.
That sounds amazing. I'm liking it so far. Like I said, I need to spend more time reading. That's my big problem right now. Is just getting the time to do everything that I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have had an absolutely amazing show tonight, and I wanted to thank you for your time, and thank you for coming by. I just have one more question for you.
Sure. And yeah, I had a great time. This was a lot of fun. Anytime you want to have me back, I am more than willing.
Oh, thank you, and I'm definitely going to ask you to come back. If you're able. Um, okay, so the question is, you're in a major superhero universe, call it Marvel or DC. You, my friend, are a superhero. What are your powers? And what does your costume look like?
Oh, um, I have always wanted super speed. I think, even though I'm a Marvel guy at heart, I think I would want to be a member of the Flash family. And so I would be a speedster in the DC universe, with a code name like, I don't know, Supersonic or something like that. I wouldn't actually be the Flash. I'm perfectly happy with Wally being in that role. Yes, I said Wally, not Barry. As for what my costume would look like, probably, along the same lines as the Flash, something very uh, basic and iconic. Um, but uh, I like blues and purples more than I like red. Um, so uh, so it would probably end up looking more like XS's costume than the Flash. But something, very, uh, you know with a maybe a deep blue, uh, with some purple highlights, uh, with kind of a linear look about it, that that looked good in motion.
That's awesome. Well, Kurt, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And thank you for coming by.
You're very welcome.
Titular Characters is a show about the things we all love. It's hosted by me, the adorable Eva Webb, your anti-fascist nerd queen. Wasn't Kurt amazing? You can find out more about his show, the Welcome to Geektown Podcast, at Welcome 2, Geektown.com, or wherever you download your high-quality nerd culture podcasts. Links in the description. Hey, did you notice the new theme song this week? It was written, composed, and performed by Antonia Marquis, who is one of the coolest people you will ever run into. Follow her on Instagram at Antonia Marquis. This week's cover art, as usual, was created by the lovely and talented Empress Luxiva. One item of news, we just moved to Anchor, which means that you can leave us voice messages that we can feature in future shows. Also, we're on Apple Podcasts now and would really appreciate your ratings and reviews. If you're somewhere where you can leave a comment, mention the cost of donuts on Mars. Thank you for listening. Come again. And when you do, bring candy.